Well, hello, friends. Hey, Mike Falkenstein here, and I want to be the first one to welcome you to this new episode of Missions Talk. And I'm here again with my good friend Steve Shermer. And Steve, we're getting into kind of definitely fall, almost winter. How are things in South Carolina? Weather holding up okay?
Weather's been good. It's been cold. We've
Good.
had some below freezing days here, which is a little bit early
Oh,
for us. This is usually
yeah,
this
it
past
is.
week has been more January weather. So, but yeah, it's been good.
That's great. And of course, here in Colorado, we're just getting into snow season, and yeah, we actually had a fantastic fall. And so, it's sort of like I like the snow, but it's nice if it's just compacted to kind of a few months of the year. And so, yeah, we're doing well here. And Steve, today on our episode, I think we've got a fantastic topic
Mm.
to talk about, and it's something in missions that I'm actually not sure that it's talked about enough, right? That, kind of the idea for this episode came about when I had seen a article, I think on the OMF website, about whether or not, people who are single should still accept a call
Mm.
into, onto the missions field. And so then that got me kind of looking on the internet about different life stages of the missionary. And yeah, this is a good topic to talk about, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think both of us have come across a lot of people over the years that, whether they're single, married, married with kids, there's reasons to go, there's reasons not to go. And I think there's just a lot of people wrestling with these types of decisions based on where they're at in life.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So in terms of, why we want to talk about this, Steve, I think if we look at the overarching idea here, it's really we just want to encourage anyone who has a call towards missionary service to obey that call, sort of regardless of their stage of life. And you know the obstacles, I think, to accepting that call are many. One of those obstacles is whatever stage of life you're in. You might
Mm.
think it's just not the ideal time to go, whether you're single. I know single people a lot of times feel like they're going to miss out on a potential spouse if they obey God's call to missionary service. There are people who are, married, or like you said, married with children, and you think, oh boy, should I bring those kids to, onto the missions field?
Mm-hmm.
Will it affect their development and kind of their early lives? And so, Steve, as we kind of start on that path, what are your thoughts about kind of different life stages, singles and marrieds, and there's some unique opportunities, isn't there? Kind of wherever you're at.
Yeah, I think the short answer for me is God uses all of them. They
Mm-hmm.
all have pros and cons when it comes to serving. Singles have all the time in the world. They don't have the distraction of a spouse or children running around the house, grabbing their attention to prevent them from serving.
Mm-hmm.
Married couples have the benefit of serving alongside each other and encouraging one another, where you have really an automatic teammate when you go somewhere. And of course, when I
Yeah.
went to the field, we had kids. So having kids with us was a huge blessing because it was actually very attractive to the local people that we
Right.
were serving among. So our kids were it drew people to us in
Mm.
ways that we couldn't have gotten people to come to us before.
Okay.
So I think every stage has its benefits. God is using everyone. God is calling people from every life stage to go. And it's really not a matter of an excuse of why we can't go because we're at a certain life stage. It really comes down to, is God calling you? And if God's calling you, then you work through whatever the obstacles are in your life stage to get there.
Yeah, that's right. That's good advice. So, Steve, I'm wondering, you could probably speak into this more than I can from an agency perspective, because I know at Silk Road Catalyst, you guys actually do have staff that are serving overseas. And so in terms of the different ways that you prepare different people to enter into missionary service, as you have a candidate who then you accept, and then they then would go to the missionary field, what would the differences be between, okay, someone that's single and here's kind of what we need to kind of walk you through versus, someone who's married, and then the third one, of course, is married with kids. Is there much difference in terms of the training that they get to prepare?
Well, if they're coming from the U.S., the training is almost identical in the sense
Okay.
of where we send people to get training. It's called the Center for Intercultural, CIT, Center for Intercultural Training.
Okay.
Sorry, I get the name confused with something else.
All these acronyms, yeah.
But a lot of their training is a lot of the information they're going through is the same. They do have courses throughout the training that are maybe specialized for different groups of people outside the core training. But I think the main difference is when you get to the field, obviously you're going to have different concerns, whether you're single or married with kids. You've got different concerns to think about. Single people can think about going to a bit more places, I would say, for the most part, because they don't have any other people in their immediate life outside of their family back home that they have to worry about. They don't have to worry about the lives of their little kids and the life of their spouse. So I think they're a little bit more free to do things. They're also, I would say, singles get going a little bit quicker because, again, you don't have to worry about other people. Now, if you're married without kids, outside of having a spouse, you can definitely get going a lot faster in terms of language learning, getting out there, meeting people, getting accustomed to the culture. When you got kids, you're going to slow down a little bit at first, just because you do have to think about the little ones that you have in your house. You have to think about their education. You have to think about their acclimation to the culture. So you're going to have less time to be out there doing some of the things a single person can just jump straight in and do from day one.
Oh, right. That's very good. That's right. And you are right. I actually think that for someone who is single, I would, if there are single people that are watching this episode, I would say to you, there's a tremendous opportunity for you to have a very deep impact on the missions field. As you're, Steve, as you said, your time is your own. And, literally you can be doing your, whatever activities you're doing, on the field, not quite 24/7, but pretty close. I mean, you can do as much as that friendship making opportunities and, as you want. And so I remember, Steve, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 talks about this a little bit, where he says, to the unmarried and to the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. And he goes on to talk about how, if you're married, you have just sort of the trouble of the additional, a mental weight of having a wife and kids, or, spouse and kids. And, for the single, you have none of that. You can just, go and, do your work. And, Steve, in terms of this whole business of, because on the internet, as I was reading about this, different articles, there's a lot of concern about for a single person that they'll miss out on, a potential spouse potentially. And I would just say that, hey, if you're following God's will to the missions field, God's big enough to take care of a spouse as well. And you might just find someone there who also has a deep heart for the place where you're at, a deep heart for missions. And so you could, there just could be a lot of connection there. See, what else would you want to say to the single people that are watching?
Well, I met my wife in London, or really technically outside of London.
Okay.
One of my colleagues met his wife on the mission field, and they got married. And
Hmm.
so, you know, if the concern is I'm going to miss out on your spouse, the reality is God knows where He's calling you. He knows
That's
where
right.
you're at, and He knows how
That's
to get
exactly.
your future spouse to you. You know,
Amen. That's right,
He's
exactly right.
if you think He is limited to your hometown, then you've already put God in such a small box that you don't really understand how big He is. And
That's
so
right.
it doesn't matter where you're at in the world. You could meet them in an airport. You could meet them on a mission field. You can meet them like I did at a conference. You just never know where you're going to meet this person. And I'm not saying you go to the mission field and you meet a national. You know, maybe you want to marry someone from your home country. That's fine. You could still meet someone from your home country, like I did in another country. So
Mm, right.
uh, God's not limited by this. So it's really a matter of faith, of stepping out and trusting God that, yes, I want to be married when you're single, but I know God's
Mm-hmm.
also called me to this place. So I'm going to go trusting God
Amen.
that He's going to bring me my spouse at the right time in the right place.
That's right. That's very good advice, Steve. And again, I would just emphasize, kind of to tag along to that again, just this idea of, if you have a heart for missions and particularly for, the place that God has sent you, um, actually almost the last thing you would want to do is, marry someone who had no heart for missions or that place, or
Hmm.
that actually could impede your future ability to do ministry there. And um yeah, long story short, I always have a story I like to tell about that. So when I first got involved in China, I was just kind of doing in the exploratory mode and just meeting a lot of people who were there. And there was this one guy I met who had a heart for China, felt like he was called there, but his wife just absolutely hated China.
Hmm.
Just they tried to do everything they could to, quote unquote, Americanize their apartment to make it seem more like at home. Of course, which in the 90s was harder. It's
Yes.
probably easier now. I mean, now in these Chinese cities, there's a Kia and Walmart, and there's these companies now. It's probably a lot easier. And just the mental weight that was for him was just tremendous. And I had heard later that, yeah, eventually they just returned home. And
Hmm.
I just think, oh, what, I mean, it's really a horrible situation for both of them. Right? On one hand, you don't want to fault the wife. She just didn't have a heart for
Yeah.
this. And but was a believer. And you just don't want to have to drag a spouse to a place like that. Things are not going to end up well for you, your ministry, what you want to do, what you think you should be doing. And so, Steve, would you generally agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Like you said, you don't want to force your wife to, or your spouse, whether it's husband or wife, to go with you. I mean, when we decide to go, you know, with between me and my wife, uh, I think what I liked about our calling, well, in many ways, I was already called at that point to China. My wife, when we decided to move, my wife already knew we were going, but she never told me.
Oh,
She just waited for God to give me the green light. It was more like I was just waiting for the green light, but I
oh,
wasn't going to
okay.
force her to go either. So when we went, if there was anyone who thought I forced her there, because there were a few people who might have said that, my
Okay.
wife quickly could go back. No, that's not true because I was already committed to going. I had the green light to go, and we waited for me to get the green light second. And then when
Okay.
we both had the green light, we went. So it does make it better because it's exciting to go to these places for a week, and so many people think, oh, I want to be a missionary because they went there for a week and they
Right.
they had a honeymoon experience in
Right.
some far off land. They thought it was exciting. It's not that way when you live there. It is tough.
No,
It's
that's right.
stressful. It is, as your life stage evolves, it's different from single to married, and from married to married with children.
Hmm.
Your life on the field radically changes in every stage. And I'm sorry to say, it doesn't necessarily decrease the stress either. Okay,
Hmm.
especially when you got kids, it becomes more stressful when they're sick and they're getting illnesses that you can't identify, and the doctors are trying to figure out what's going on, and it's your kid.
Right.
The level of stress you feel as a parent is intense. And
That's
so
right.
if you've got kids with learning challenges and trying to figure out how to do that, where maybe back here in the U.S., the resources are in abundance. Whereas you go
Mm-hmm.
somewhere else, and you're like, well, what do I do to help my kids that's having learning difficulties? Can
Mm.
we get tested? Can we afford any of the resources? Because they're a lot more expensive, even across Asia.
So, yeah, for those of you that are single, hopefully that advice has been good. For those, Steve, that are married with no kids, I would think that the opportunities to do outreach and evangelism together, particularly again, if you both feel like you've been called towards that place, can just be tremendous, right? Because again, you don't have those kids that need that time. It's just the two of you. Um, yeah, it seems like there would just be an abundant opportunity. Wife can, be meeting women. The husband can be meeting men in the area. You together could be, making friends with those that are, couples, married people. And so, Steve, speak to us about that a little bit. Kind of married with no kids, there can be a lot of pretty cool opportunities, can't there?
Yeah, if you think about some of the cultures, just the religious cultures like Islam, even Hinduism, it is best for men to engage with men, and even in cultures outside of that, even in China, I would argue it was
I
best
would
for
think
men
so.
to engage with men rather than men with women, and vice versa. And so being married, I think it opens up a whole world of opportunities that you don't have as a single person, because then you get to engage, as you were talking about. Let's just take an Islamic environment. Women get to hang out with women, men with men. Whereas,
Mm,
as a man, it would be completely inappropriate for me to go talk to a woman in a strict Islamic environment. Uh, Not just from a purity perspective on our end, but from a cultural perspective on their end. It'd be highly inappropriate. But when you have, as a married couple, you can actually engage with other couples, other families, whereas you would have a lot more difficult time doing it as a single person. And so it opens up a whole realm. Like you said, you do get to serve together. The moment you have kids, there's opportunities where maybe one spouse gets to go do something where the other one can't, because they've got to watch the kids, and maybe it's in a place where the kids shouldn't go, or maybe it's to a meeting or a conference where it's just too challenging to bring the kids. Whereas as a couple, you get to enjoy those things together. You get
yeah.
to go, and outside of dating your spouse and keeping up a healthy marriage, which you do need to carve out time for that. It's
That's
just
right.
so many doors open for you.
It really is. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so there are an abundant opportunities there. And I think then also, Steve, about, as what you're describing is taking place, right? The husband's spending time with men, the wife is spending time with women. Hopefully, some of those people are, you know, married to each other that you're
Mm-hmm.
spending time with, to then begin having them in your home too, and having them for dinners and I know in a lot of places, of course, people are curious about, of course, this would be for an American missionary, but people are interested about American culture. The one story I always think about is the time that we were living in China. I made these Chinese friends who had no idea about American football, and they just were so puzzled about why would we like this game. And so I had gotten of course, this was back in the early 2000s, and so someone had sent me a videotape of the Super Bowl that year, and so we had a big event where we had a bunch of guys in our apartment, and I just kind of walked through with them, a little bit about the rules of the game and why I felt it was interesting, and it was just a neat opportunity to kind of develop friendships. And so to be able to have them in our home was just really cool. And then their wives came over and spent time with my wife, and so there's a lot of opportunity for even to have them then in your home too, isn't there?
There were times when I was leading a Bible study or a discovery group for either new believers or non-believers, and there were always women in there. But it would have been very uncomfortable even for me just to have that, a big group mostly of women in my home if I was single.
Oh, right. Yeah, that just wouldn't have worked.
Having my wife there, it was no problem because she was, she's there, she's available, she's part of it. And so, as you were talking about the Super Bowl, wow, that really was a long time ago. No streaming options back then. No
streaming
no replay
options.
On ESPN online or anything like that.
That's right.
If you don't get that videotape, you've got nothing. And I mean, if I'm in a let's say a Bible study with a mixed audience, while there are some women who are really interested in those kinds of things, and not all women are interested in that.
Right.
And my wife definitely wouldn't be. So having her there, she gets to spend time with those who aren't interested. And if I'm spending time with part of the group, and they're interested in what we're watching, it like I said earlier, and like you've said, it just opens up the opportunities for you. And you're not, as a single, you're more narrow in some sense. I mean, you're more free to do things, but you're more narrow based on your interest. But when you have a partner with you, a spouse, their interests are going to be different. And so it expands the number of people you get to interact with as a family.
That's right. That's right. That's very good. And then, Steve, of course, our final kind of life stage we wanted to talk about, of course, is married with kids. And that, again, brings just some great opportunities, doesn't it, to meet other parents in your city where you're living who also have kids potentially. And even, eventually your kids playing with their kids, and you meet at a playground, or, there's just a lot of those kind of opportunities, and just a unique atmosphere to do stuff with other families. And I know you told us you had your kids with you when you lived overseas, as I had two of my three. My general kind of comment I often make about especially young kids, very young kids, we had toddler, aged kids, is that for them, as long as they were around mom and dad, they were really fine, right? We could have been, anywhere around the world, and so they didn't really care. And it becomes a little bit more of a challenge when those kids, for missionary families, get older. But again, partially because of what you said about potential challenges in education, or, there's more to kind of figure out. But man, almost all of the teenage kids of missionary families that I know just absolutely embrace the place. They love. They also develop a heart and a love many times if they've gone to a, international school in their city. They're also taking. So I know, like the international school where we lived in China, I mean, it was part of the course curriculum. They had not only English classes, but they also had Chinese. So they're all learning the Chinese, and now they've had that skill that they're learning, right? So, Steve, briefly talk to us about kind of married with kids and kind of the unique opportunities that you see there.
As you were talking, I was thinking about my kids when they had their birthday. So when we have a party in our home, it ended up being anywhere between 5 to 8 different countries represented in our house.
Oh, that's cool.
And even though my kids were really young when we were in China, rather than teenagers, now that they are teenagers, a lot of what they learned in those early years are still prevalent in their life right now. They still love being around people from other countries.
Mm.
You know, when we have either missionary families who drive through and visit us and we'll have lunch with them and they're hanging out with the other MKs, they absolutely connect with them. They know how to connect with them still. When one of my son's closest friends at school is from India. And it's just ingrained in them now. They can't, when we talk about right now going on a trip, maybe to the Middle East, my kids still ask, so when do I get to go next?
Oh,
that's great. When do you think we'll be able to go? When's the next time we'll be able to go as a family? Now we have, a stage in our life with my in-laws and stuff living with us, which we love, and we're loving our time right now. But it is still a question they ask. And if I say, we're going to go, maybe if the money's there, we're going to go to the Middle East, my kids won't sit there, I need to pray about that and make sure it's the right. Their automatic reaction is, yeah, when are we going?
Oh, great.
They're not worried about it. They just think it's normal to them that we do that.
Oh, right.
And that going to some far off place is not something they have to always think about. Really for us, it's more thinking about the stage we're in. Is there time to do it? Is this the right time? If it's not, we don't. But if it is, you just buy a ticket and go. That's how we are.
All right.
And so I loved it. It was tough. Our first day, literally, I guess technically it was our second day in China. I can say trying to get to where we were living, there was a moment it's like, why did we do this? Because our kids were really small and trying to navigate that airport with a stroller in a culture that doesn't understand strollers. And trying to, of course, we had the big American strollers at that. And, there's always moments where we thought, was this a bright idea? But apart from a few moments like that, overall, we loved it. We had fun. We enjoyed it. Our kids still talk about the food. I mean, it's, again, like I said earlier, it's just ingrained in them. So there's something about kids who grow up in an environment that's very different from their own. They just see the world differently.
That's right.
And I want them to see it that way. I want them to not look at it through a narrow lens just by living in their home culture. That's
right. No, that's very good, Steve. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say something similar to that actually, as you were talking, I was then thinking about all the kids of missionary families that I know. Now, of course, many of those kids are, out of the house and doing, their own things. And generally speaking, of course, this is not 100% true, but generally speaking, I would say that those kids who grew up in a third culture actually end up being higher performing people than, many who don't. And I think it's just a matter of what you said. I mean, it's growing up in a different culture, seeing things in a different way, understanding the world better, maybe more holistically, and growing up in a family whose parents, had a definite calling and purpose to their lives. They then develop that same kind of, determination in their own lives. And so for those who may be watching who think, oh, my kids may suffer, I would just say, no, I've not seen that to be the case. And in fact, just the opposite, that, they generally tend to end up being higher performing people than, than the general population. So, Steve, as we in this episode, we definitely, I think, want to bring out that different stages of our lives really do bring out different opportunities, right? That each opportunity is a special way to reach people for Christ. And again, above all, obey the call regardless of whatever stage that you're in. I always remember this this quote from the guy who started the U.S. Center for World Missions, and his research showed that it was something like, in general, in America, about 1 out of every 100 people who felt a call towards, going on the missions field, actually obeyed it. And, of course, that then brings us to where we're at today, where there are still so many in the world that are unreached. And I think you would agree with me, Steve, right? I mean, just regardless of the stage of life that you're in, obey that call, right?
Absolutely. I mean, any one of us can come up with an excuse not to go. Everybody in the world, every believer in the world has a reason to not go. The question is, as you were stating it, are we going to obey or not obey? When God calls, that's really the only two options we have. We can't look to external. Now, really what I tell people when we're dealing with external pressures, external issues, is they don't make our decision. We don't let those external factors decide whether we obey or not obey God. We acknowledge them, we recognize them, and then when we obey, we work toward figuring out, okay, how do we overcome those either obstacles or factors we've got to figure out or something. There's always struggles. I mean, there's many reasons why some organizations don't let families with kids over 12 years old go who are in the household. There are tremendous struggles with teenagers trying to adapt to a new environment, leaving friends back home. So a lot of organizations just won't let that happen because the struggles are just too great. But outside of that, there are ways to go. If you're called to go, if your church endorses your call to go, regardless of where your kids are at, what ages they're at, if you've gone through a thorough, I wanted to say vetting, but that's not really the right word, a thorough process of understanding what it's going to be like, the training you need, the training your kids need to go, then regardless of your life stage, regardless of your kid's age, you have a choice to obey or not go, obey or disobey. And in obeying, you just try to figure out what those problems are, predict what those problems are going to be when you get there, and create and work on those before you even have to deal with them. You're always trying to figure out problems in advance in many areas like business and life, and trying to solve those before you have to face them. And you're not going to solve them perfectly, but really the point is God's going to help everyone get through whatever struggles they have to face. I've seen people deal with cancer and do cancer treatments abroad. I've seen parents deal with special needs, educational needs for their kids abroad. I've seen it all. God's going to provide. We just have to believe that He will, and then let Him do what He does as we follow in obedience.
Amen. That's really great. And Steve, as you're talking, of course, we don't have time to get into this much, but as you know, here at 1-8 Catalyst, we're actually focusing more and more on helping Christians really understand kind of the value of obedience, right? Of both the Bible and Christ's commands. And I would certainly think that we would also talk about, God's calling, that a disciple of Jesus obeys Jesus, right? Obeys this call, both His commands that He gives us and to the call. And so, to feel like you've been called by God to do a certain thing and to not obey it, speaks something about maybe your relationship with the Lord. So maybe that could be another episode we could do. But it's important, because at least in part, the reason that there are so many in this world that are still unreached is the lack of obedience of, again, this quote about, 1 out of only 100 actually obey the call to missionary service. So, Steve, maybe that's a good place to end it for now. Thanks so much, Steve. I just so enjoy doing these episodes with you, and I'm so thankful for those of you that are watching, and for your participation with us. We, of course, would love to hear from you. Of course, our Facebook page, just facebook.com/missions talk. You can direct message us there. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for future episodes, if you want to get in touch with us, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to having you with us on the next episode of Missions Talk.